West Africa Democracy Radio.
WADR. Promoting dialogue.
It's midday in Dakar. Good afternoon and many thanks for staying tuned to West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting on 94.9 FM and around the world on wadr.org. This is NewsLink. Here are the top stories. The associations of regional and municipal councils in Niger declare support for the junta to achieve a smooth transition. President Bola Tinubu of Nigeria calls on the United States to advance its international policies to accommodate fragile democracies. The Burkinabe National Gendarmerie graduates over 1,000 recruits to protect the nation and support the fight against terrorism. And Ghana's Vice President Bawumia emerges victorious with 70% total from the National Delegates Conference. Stay with us for details of these stories and more.
Here is Tawfiq Abdul Nasser with NewsLink.
Many thanks for joining us on this edition of NewsLink. Our first story takes us to Niger, where regional and municipal councils have declared their support for the National Council for the Safeguarding of the Fatherland, CNSP. They aim to help the junta achieve a successful transition. The declaration followed a conclusive meeting of the Association of Municipalities of Niger and the Association of Regions of Niger in Niamey over the weekend. Oge Obi-Erika reports.
In a statement over the weekend, the two unions, which bring together all 262 local authorities in Niger, said they have taken note of the CNSP's proclamation to accommodate the administrative and executive bodies. The president of the Nigerian Municipal and Regional Councils also expressed their readiness to participate in the National Council for dialogue without political or partisan consideration. The associations in the statement titled the Declaration of the Territorial Collectives of Niger condemned the drastic, inhuman and unprecedented sanctions, including border closures, imposed on the nation. Recall General Abdurrahman Chiani, head of the CNSP, last week announced a 3-year maximum transition plan and convened an inclusive national dialogue. But the regional bloc ECOWAS strongly rejects this proposal and insists on the reinstatement of President Mohamed Bazoum. However, dialogue between the junta and the sub-regional body continues, with partners suggesting diplomatic means to avoid any potential use of force. In a related development, at least 20,000 people on Saturday gathered in the Seni Kunche Stadium in Niamey to support the National Council for the Safeguarding of the Homeland, 24 hours after the expulsion of the French ambassador in Niger, Sylvain Ite.
Oge Obi-Erika reporting there. President Bola Tinubu of Nigeria is calling on the United States government to ensure its policy is intentionally collaborative with independent African democracies. The Nigerian leader maintained that institutions are under assault by anti-democratic forces within and outside the continent. Tinubu made the plea while playing host to the U.S. Presidential Envoy and Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs, Ambassador Molifi, at the Presidential Villa, Abuja. WADR's Usman Umar reports.
The Special Advisor on Media and Publicity to President Tinubu said his principal, who doubles as chairman of the ECOWAS Authority of Heads of State and Government, had gone deep in its efforts to use diplomatic instruments to peacefully resolve the crisis. The statement by Ajuri Ngilali reveals that Tinubu has been holding the Economic Community of West African States from deploying its military option on the Niger Republic crisis. He noted that American-backed development finance and multilateral institutions, which were designed to support war-torn Europe after World War II, require swift and comprehensive reform to meet the development requirements of younger democracies in Africa, which operate in authoritarian, crowded environments. Tinubu added that such legitimate yearnings from Africans would no longer be manipulated to serve the narrow aims of self-seeking demagogues through unconstitutional takeovers of power. Yusuf Tugga is Nigeria's foreign affairs minister. He speaks further on the meeting between the two parties.
We're looking at, of course, security concerns. That's the elephant in the room. You know, what's happening in our region, what's happening in Niger. The return to democracy and normalcy is paramount. The security concerns in the region also very important.
Pledging its support for the position of ECOWAS, the U.S. Special Presidential Envoy expressed the high regard the U.S. administration has for the leadership of Chairman of the ECOWAS Authority of Heads of State and Government, President Bola Tinubu, and extended an exclusive invitation from U.S. President Joe Biden to meet on the sidelines of the United Nations General Assembly in New York City to advance discussions further in late September, an invitation President Tinubu has accepted. For NewsLink on West Africa Democracy Radio, Usman Umar reporting from Abuja.
Here in Senegal, a platform known as Social Forum says state-by-state solutions to manage irregular migration have so far proved ineffective. The civil society organization is therefore proposing a community approach and calls on ECOWAS member states to adopt a concerted migration policy. Mamadou Mignan Diouf is the coordinator of the Senegalese Social Forum.
A
community solution was needed, and this will be achieved through what might be called a West African community policy, because, as you know, not all those who leave Dakar and take to the sea, the Atlantic Ocean, from our shores, whether in Fasboy here in Dakar, Charoy, Kafountine in Casamance, or towards Mbour, are Senegalese. Some come from Sierra Leone, others from Guinea-Conakry, Cambodia, and even Central Africa. So it's not just a question of Senegal. Senegal has the advantage or disadvantage of being on the coast. It faces both America and Europe, from the Canary Islands, Cape Verde, and Mauritania. If we consider that not all those living are Senegalese, it's evident that others will come to the smugglers from Guinea, Sierra Leone, Liberia, Cote d'Ivoire, etc. And so we wouldn't have the same problems as in the past. The problem would therefore not have been completely solved. So if a single country wants to solve the problem on its own, it's practically impossible. That's why it seems to me that if we take all these factors into account, the solution can only be a community one. It's about time Africa had its own agenda. On the issue of migration, which is a question of a population on the move, it's a good thing that Africa has an agenda that enables it to say at international meetings, "This is my opinion," shared by ECOWAS and the countries of the South of Africa.
That was Mamadou Mignan Diouf, the coordinator of the Senegalese Social Forum.
Fresh and breaking news all the time. Hear it first as the news breaks, only on West Africa Democracy Radio. NewsLink continues.
And now to security matters. West African countries in the Gulf of Guinea will soon welcome a combined military-civilian operation designed to prevent instability triggered by extremist groups. The mission is being launched by the European Union, according to a German daily. Imoredet has more in this report.
European Union member states have agreed to begin a mission in the Gulf of Guinea in West Africa, with police and soldiers deployed to Ghana, Togo, Benin and Cote d'Ivoire. A German daily, Die Welt am Sonntag, reported on Sunday, citing diplomatic sources. The combined mission hopes to train and advise local security forces, help prepare for anti-terror operations, give technical support and implement confidence-building measures in the security sector. According to the report, Benin and Ghana had already officially invited the EU to deploy the mission on their territories. The EU, the sources say, is concerned about the spread of insurgency from the Sahel region toward the southern coastal countries on the Gulf of Guinea, leading to even more widespread instability in the region. In recent years, violent extremism by groups linked to Islamic State and Al-Qaeda has rocked countries such as Mali, Niger and Burkina Faso. The report on the mission comes as several countries in the region have fallen under military governments following coups, with the latest being on July 26 in Niger. Its launch, however, is dependent on the approval given by EU foreign ministers at a meeting scheduled for October in Luxembourg.
Imoredet filed that report. Meanwhile, the Burkinabe National Gendarmerie has graduated over 1,000 recruits to serve the nation. For 5 months, the young officers acquired essential military knowledge supplemented by professional training at the Gendarmerie Training Center in Gaoua in the west of the country. James Ejapon reports that the first batch of the auxiliary units includes 1,498 non-commissioned soldiers, including 100 technicians in various fields and 9 female personnel.
The recruits are subject to the regime of non-commissioned soldiers of the Federal Army, and the duration of their initial contract, like the Army, is 4 years. An official document by the Gendarmerie categorized the officers as second-class auxiliary constable, first-class auxiliary constable, brigadier, and chief brigadier. The presidency said the current security situation requires densification of the network of the national territory by strengthening the existing system and promoting civil relations. This requires the reinforcement of the workforce undertaken by the Federal Army, whose overall objective is to recapture lost territories, said Lieutenant Colonel Evrard Somda, Chief of Staff of the National Gendarmerie. Recall, in November last year, the government announced the recruitment of an exceptional contingent of security auxiliaries in the context of the fight against armed terrorist groups. Since the military coup in September 2022, led by Captain Ibrahim Traore, the Transitional Authority has launched a vast campaign to recruit civilians to join the ranks of the National Armed Forces. Alongside the soldiers, more than 100,000 volunteers for the defense of the homeland, VDP, are engaged in the fight against armed terrorist groups.
James Ejapon with that report. You're listening to NewsLink on West Africa Democracy Radio 94.9 FM Dakar. Here is a reminder of our top stories. The associations of regional and municipal councils in Niger declare support for the junta to achieve a smooth transition. President Bola Tinubu of Nigeria calls on the United States to advance its international policies to accommodate fragile democracies. The Burkinabe National Gendarmerie graduates over 1,000 recruits to protect the nation and support the fight against terrorism. And Ghana's Vice President Bawumia emerges victorious with 70% total from the National Delegates Conference. Still ahead is the press review, guest interview, and sports update. Stay with us.
You are listening to West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting from Dakar, Senegal.
Now, Ghana's Vice President, Dr. Mahmoud Bawumia, has won the first round of voting to determine the flag bearer for the governing New Patriotic Party, NPP. Dr. Bawumia gained close to 70% of the total votes, beating 9 other candidates, including former Trade Minister Alan Tremantin and Member of Parliament Kennedy Ejapon. Saturday's election, which recorded some disturbances, eliminated 5 candidates, with the remaining 5 to contest in the final round on November 4 to determine the flag bearer for the governing party in the 2024 general elections. From Accra, Atiwen Lawson has the story.
Cheers, drumming and dancing met the visibly elated Vice President after he was announced the winner of the special delegate election to prune the aspirants list from 10 to 5. Dr. Bawumia won the Super Delegates Conference with a total of 629 votes, representing 68.15% of the vote. Asin Central Member of Parliament Kennedy Ejapon came in second with 132 votes, representing 14.30%, while former Trades Minister Alan Tremantin placed third with 93 votes, representing 10.29%. Reacting to his victory, Vice President Dr. Mahmoud Bawumia says he looks forward to taking the ultimate vote on November 4.
I am very, very humbled, very grateful for the outcome of this election. So I see this as a step in the direction of winning the flag bearership of the party.
The election was, however, not without controversy. Representatives of the 2 runners-up, Kennedy Ejapon and Alan Tremantin, were allegedly assaulted by supporters of the Vice President. Yao Boabeng Asamoah is a spokesperson for the former Trades Minister, Alan Chermanting.
If they are the results, it's obviously a public sham. That's why I'm telling the entire world, including His Excellency the President, to put his foot down. Because if we all make rules and we decide that the rules will not be enforced, the rules are for the benefit of the public and the candidates, and yet on the ground they will not be enforced, force is applied, impunity is applied.
Notwithstanding, the elections process was described as a largely successful one, as the top 5 ready for the final round of voting on November 4. Reporting for NewsLink on West Africa Democracy Radio, I am Atiewin Imbila Lawson in Accra.
This is the newspaper review. Stay on top of the news. Get the most important stories with added insight and concise review.
This is the newspaper review.
Usman Umar in Abuja joins us again with the major headlines from the Nigerian dailies.
Hello and welcome to the press review segment. Now, we have a couple of newspapers to look at. So let's begin with the Daily Trust newspaper. The Daily Trust is leading with this banner headline: Massive flood looms in states as Cameroon plans to open dam, with riders Adamawa, Taraba, Kogi, Benue, Nasarawa, Plateau, others at risk. Water volume higher than last year's. This is according to the Minister of Water Resources. National Emergency Management Agency tells residents to relocate. Now, we also have some stories on the front page of the Daily Trust newspaper. Intrigues, controversies over Nigeria's foreign reserves. With rider, why did CBN borrow $15 billion? Import capacity under threat. This is a story on the economy, talking about Nigeria's foreign reserve. We also move to the Nation newspaper, leading with Tinubu servicing debt with 90% revenue unsustainable. With the rider, good pay for judges will lift judiciary, says President. Nigeria has been under this burden of using 90% of its revenue to service debt, leaving only 10% for other very important activities. And the president is saying this is no longer sustainable. But this conversation is also coming at a time when the government has decided to increase the take-home pay of Nigerian judges. Of course, another interesting story is the one on the front page of Abuja Inquirer. Abuja Inquirer is leading today with this very important story: revised public service rule. Abuja residents at risk as over 30 doctors to go. Medical Council to wade in. Recently, there has been a revision of the public service rule, and this story is taking a deeper look at it, saying that if this goes, over 30 medical doctors will leave Abuja, that is the nation's capital. And even as things are, of course, the nation's capital is facing shortage of medical personnel. And if the new public service rule is to be applied, this story is saying over 30 doctors will have to go. But it is expected that the Medical Council of Nigeria will wade in to, ensure that there is stability in the healthcare sector. This is the much we have for you today on the press review segment with me, Usman Omar, from Nigeria's capital, Abuja. It's back to you in the studios.
Politics,
Analysis on major news,
social matters, and all. This is A Guest.
Our guest interview this afternoon takes us back to Nigeria, where President Bola Tinubu is urging the United States government to adopt a purposeful, collaborative policy with independent African democracies. The Nigerian leader emphasized that institutions are currently facing challenges from both anti-democratic elements within the continent and beyond. Tinubu conveyed this appeal while hosting Ambassador Molifi, the U.S. presidential envoy and Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs at the Presidential Villa in Abuja. However, certain governance experts have voiced their dissenting views, suggesting that African leaders should concentrate on formulating strategies for self-governance without external Western interference. Here to delve into this topic is Adeni Ikunu, an expert in international relations.
When he talked about collaborative, that makes a lot of sense. But if I check the financials of African countries and the United States of America, I can say very clear that the collaboration is that of a superior and a subordinate partner. And when one talks about anti-democratic forces, the major anti-democratic forces that are preventing Africa from realizing its corporate and individual destinies are those that continue to sit tight on the continent. If you look at Museveni in Uganda, he altered his constitution to remain in power, held by the parliament. If you look at Ivory Coast, the same thing was done with the support of France. So when we do a thorough analysis of these incidences on the continent, I think that Africa needs to look inwards first. I've not heard the United Arab Emirates, I've not heard them call on the US to come and help the Arab Peninsula in one way or the other. I've not heard China, Russia, and even some countries that are not as big as Nigeria or as big as the continent of Africa. So I think that the first thing is for Africa to be sincere with its own self and speak first to its regional leaders as well as the continental leaders on the issues that have to do with not giving the difference of democracy to them. You'd agree with me that the U.S. is a very, reliable country in terms of giving support, but the U.S. is not a perfect country as well. So I think that when we talk about collaboration, it makes a lot of sense for Africa to actually be able to address those issues before calling on the U.S. every time.
Right. So you have been an advocate for us doing it on our own because through your submission, you were talking about we doing it on our own. So why do you think that anytime we have a problem, we would have to run to the United States or we run to the West and not solve it by ourselves? What is the challenge?
Okay, the challenge is that many African leaders are not truly independent of the United States of America. But now let me even take the U.S. out of the picture, as the U.S. didn't have any colonial connections to Africa, except, of course, in Liberia. Now, the reality is, if you look at Niger, for instance, where the problem is, the record is there that France supported despots. So far, it doesn't affect the gains they are making from Niger. And these despots usually are the ones that prompt the emergence of coup plotters in these countries, such that the corporate destinies of the people of Niger, for instance, are affected. One of the things that I have found out by virtue of, observation and consistent research is anything that doesn't affect the interest of the West, particularly France in Francophone Africa, most definitely is not talked about. The US and other countries of the West only need to say, so far you are not democratically elected, we will not support you, we will not work with you. The same thing that cannot happen in the US, that cannot happen in Britain, that cannot happen in France, these things are happening on the continent because the West at times doesn't feel the need to stamp its foot down against people that are not allowing democracy to thrive, because most times these people actually support their interests, because the West can deceive us for all that they care. So far their interests are protected and guaranteed, but what about the growth of the continent? What about the growth of the lives of the people on the continent? But our solutions can emanate from us as a people, because we are the ones who live on this continent.
Right. It's very good you're coming up with solutions, which actually leads to my final question. So now that these problems have been identified, what are some of the solutions that you would suggest to the African heads of state so that we can manage our affairs?
Okay, the first thing we need to do is to do a reappraisal of how we have fared decades after independence, freedom of speech, because associated with majority of despotic leadership is lack of freedom of the press and freedom of speech and freedom of association. These things are fundamental to the success of democracy. They're the lives of the people. What are the things that we've brought forward that have solved the problems of the people in terms of poverty, in terms of development of manufacturing in the country, in terms of the exploration of the resources of Africa for the benefit of Africa? For instance, Niger Republic doesn't have problems with blackouts or darkness when it has an abundance of uranium. Why is it that Niger has not been able to exhaust the value chain of uranium, whereas France actually powers the entire Eiffel Tower with the uranium from Niger Republic?
Adeni Kuno is an international relations expert. Sankule Janko is here with sports update.
West Ham have announced the €38 million signing of Ghana international Mohamed Kudus from Ajax. Kudus underwent a medical on Saturday after flying into London on a private jet with West Ham technical director Tim Steddon, according to media reports. The Hammers have now sealed a deal worth €41.5 million plus $3 million in add-ons for Kudus. He becomes the club's fourth signing after Edson Alvarez, James Ward-Prowse and Konstantinos Mavropanos. Kudus has signed a 5-year deal with West Ham, claiming they had fought off intense competition from some of Europe's leading clubs to sign the attacker. And Nigeria have unveiled a 35-man provisional squad ahead of the AFCON qualifiers against Sao Tome and Principe. And that's it for sports. It's back to you.
And thus how we wrap up this edition of NewsLink from West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting from Dakar, Senegal. Many thanks to our duty technicians, Christian Mukidi and Mustafa Sek. Do interact with us via social media platforms, X, formerly Twitter, Instagram at WADR News, and on Facebook, West Africa Democracy Radio English Service. I am Tawfiq Abdul Nasir. Good afternoon.
And many thanks to you for listening to NewsLink via Hot 104.3 FM, Newmi FM 94.0, and Veritas Radio 102.9 in Banjul, the Gambia. We also appreciate our listeners in Liberia via Alternative Youth Radio 98.9 FM, Lofa County. For you listening via Radio Pad 95.1 Damango, Savannah region, and on Royals FM 104.7 Wenchi, Ghana, we say a big thank you. Remember, West Africa Democracy Radio is all about you, your views, and your opinions.